Good afternoon. Welcome to the 19th Century Charitable Association in Oak Park, where it is our vision to be a dynamic cultural center for community learning. I am Deb W. Hammond. I'm the co-director of programs and the literature chair. This is one of our literature programs. We have 30 programs in this season in our enrichment series, and they are a part of our mission to strengthen our community through learning, giving, and sharing our landmark building. I'm very pleased to introduce Christie Tate. She is our speaker. She is an author. She writes creative nonfiction and memoir. Her first book, her New York Times bestseller, Group, has been translated into 19 languages. Her essays, focusing on themes drawn from her life experiences, exploring mental health, personal relationships, addiction, mental health, personal relationships, alienation, and vulnerability, have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and many other places. She's speaking today about her new book, B.F.F. And you all know what B.F.F. is, right? Best friends forever. It's a memoir of friendship lost and found. She grew up in Dallas and now lives in Chicago with her family. Welcome again, and Christie, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks, Deb. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Christie Tate. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thanks, everybody, for coming out on this beautiful Monday to talk about literature and friendship, two of my favorite things. I've had a wonderful morning here, and I'd like to start out with a quote from one of my favorite writers, the novelist Markus Zusak. He is the author of The Book Thief, which I'm sure many of you have read or heard of, or maybe you saw the movie. He says that he writes his next book to atone for the last one. And that's exactly what BFF is. When I sold my first book that Deb mentioned, it's called Group. It also is a memoir. It's been called a chatty hero's journey about how I found romantic love by going to group therapy and looking at all the issues that stood in the way of me and healthy partnership. And just to recap those issues, we're not going to delve into them, but they included addiction in my family of origin and in myself, an eating disorder, perfectionism, unrealistic expectations, fear of intimacy, fear of sex, and shame about all of the above. So, as you can imagine, that book features a fancy Ivy League psychiatrist and my esteemed group members and lots of boyfriends, wayward boys, troubled interns, stunted financiers, and sexually confused triathletes. Again, we're not going to talk about them, but they were in the first book. And there were lots of stories about my romantic foibles, and it was all about this guy, and then this guy, and then this guy, and then I would run and tell my therapist. And when I was halfway through with the writing of Group and the editing with my editor, so now it's almost out of my hands, people were starting to ask me, what's your next book going to be about? And I went on a podcast with a woman, a podcaster who was in Hong Kong, and she said to me at the very end of our interview, she said, "Shame on you, Christie. All you write about is men, and your book ends in a wedding. That's not very feminist of you." And I'd been waiting for someone to call me out on that for about a year, but when she said that, and I said to her, I know exactly what you're saying. My next book is all about women, and I'm not even going to have a single man's name. I wasn't going to name my husband. He was just going to be the husband. And when I started writing about friendship, and there were no men's names or boys. I didn't even name my son, which was going to be very awkward. And my editor read some pages and she said, "This is so confusing. Can you please just put some names in here for these people?" So I wanted to write the story, this friendship story. By the time I started writing, we were starting to hear about loneliness, right? The Surgeon General is named loneliness as deadly as cigarettes. And people were starting to write articles about, how do I make friends? Do I join a pottery class? Do I call up my neighbor? What do we do? And I would see that and I would think to myself, I needed so much more than what could be given by a single Atlantic article about why Americans are bowling alone or whatever, you know. I knew that I wanted to tell the story of how I got to be a 35-year-old woman who decided she just wasn't that good at friendship. I had sort of thrown up my hands. I had spent all of my 20s and 30s like straightening myself out. I worked as a lawyer. I'd finally found a boyfriend who was marriage material. I was gonna have a family. So I thought, why be greedy? I've got a job, I'm gonna have a family. If I don't work out the friendship stuff, who cares? Well, it turns out that I cared, and I started to care a lot more and a lot more. Enter my friend Meredith. So Meredith is one of those people who, do you have any friends, or not yet friends, people who sit on the periphery of your life and you see them and you have fond feelings towards them, and then all of a sudden there's an event or something happens and they move from the peripheral of your life to the very center. And that's what happened with Meredith. I knew her for years. I knew her as Meredith D. I didn't even know her last name because we were both members of a 12-step organization that was anonymous. I don't even know if she knew my last name. I would see her, she was 25 years older than I was, so she wasn't she didn't run with the same group. Like I was like over in the group that would talk about like, what are we gonna do, what kind of stroller should I get, or should I be on Match.com or Craigslist.com, you know, like, and she was like with the adults, right? So we didn't really, my limitations as a friend are evident right here in this story. I didn't understand that because we didn't have the exact same life experience and stage of life, I didn't recognize her as a friend or friend potential. That's how limiting my beliefs are. I ran around like a middle schooler, like, you know, in middle school, if you're in 6th grade, you could maybe be friends with a 7th grader, but you wouldn't be friends with an 8th grader. Like, that's just crazy. Why would you do that? So Meredith came up to me one day after a meeting, and by this point, this is a 12-step meeting. We were there every Saturday with about 30 other people, and I'd spent many times in there crying about this boy and that boy, and I was no longer crying about that. I don't even know what I'd said in the meeting. And she came up to me and she's like, you know what? You're bad at friendship, and I'm bad at friendship, and I think we can get better. And I was kind of like flattered. Right? Like I like to be picked, and she had a reputation of being like a spiritual guru. She was very solid in the spiritual aspects of the program, and she wasn't in there crying about her boyfriend every week like some people. So I felt happy to be chosen, and I also felt like, but wait, I just got engaged. I kind of want to be like a bridezilla. I don't really want to work on myself right now. I kind of just, have I earned a break? You know, I just got through the gauntlet of dating, the gauntlet of law. Can I just coast? And Meredith said, you can if you want to. And the reason why I said yes to her proposition that we work on friendship together was twofold. Number one, I knew that me throwing up my hands and just saying, well, I'm just not good at friendship, I knew it was a cop-out. I had learned how to do many hard things, right? What could be harder than dating? And the second thing was I actually really wanted to be good at friendship. I remember sitting on the couch, social media was new, right? And so this was my first time confronting, all the people I went to high school with are still friends, and they go to Cancun, and their kids go to camp together. And I didn't have any friends from high school at the time, not a single one. I sort of like, when I leave, and I didn't come back, and for years I was ashamed of this, and then ashamed of that, and then I had an idea, who would want to be friends with me? So you can see from my mindset, an article about joining pickleball was not going to fix what was wrong with me and friendship. But maybe what Meredith was offering could help me. So her idea, which is very common, if you're familiar at all with 12-step programs, there's a lot of homework, you know what I mean? Like, well, why don't you write about this, and why don't you write about that? And our first homework assignment that Meredith assigned to the both of us is, why don't you write down all the reasons why you think you're not a good friend? I thought, okay, I can do that. I didn't want to. I wanted to like look at bridesmaids' dresses and pick out baby names. But I thought, what if I give a sliver of this, invest in this friendship project, then maybe it will pay off. I definitely had the experience that if you invest in projects that involve other people and things that you really care about, I knew results could happen. That's why I was in the 12-step program. I'd learned my eating disorder had been arrested, my relationships had gotten better with men. Now it was time. So I thought I would write and write and write forever, but really there were just a few things that really stuck out, that were standing in my way. And one of them, super boring, I have low self-esteem. Like, who wants to be friends with me? You can have that in middle school when you get to be 35 and you haven't recognized your own worth. It's kind of time to get over yourself, right? I mean, that's how I felt about myself. I was like, that's kind of embarrassing. But then there were some other ones that were a little more interesting. And Meredith and I would meet after a meeting, and we'd bring our little homework, and I'd say goodbye to my friends. They were going to go get coffee, and I was going to do my homework with Meredith. And she said, read me your list. And I said, well, here are some of before I could really get at the interesting stuff, I was like, I think there's some myths about friendship that have stood in my way. And one of them was, I thought friendship was supposed to be easy and natural and really fun all the time, especially if you're a girl. And because I didn't have that experience ever, certainly not in grammar school and not in middle school and not in high school and not in college, I thought, well, I'm either not a very good girl or I'm not very good at friendship, and either way, I don't know how to fix it. And so that was one of them. Another one was, if I was good at friendship, I wouldn't have had so many breakups. I had a big breakup with a friend in 5th grade. I had a big breakup in 8th grade. After college, and when I got to college, my high school friends, I remember them reaching out to me and me just not reaching back. I don't know what inside of me kept me from saying, oh, come visit me at my school, and how about I come see you at your school? They were all doing that, and I just was like, I couldn't reach back. I didn't know how, and I didn't know what was stopping me. And another one was, this was the big one that I thought would sound so exotic to Meredith. I said to her, I think I have sister issues. And she burst out laughing, and she said, the greatest thing a friend could ever say to you when you've said something vulnerable. She said, me too. And I was like, really? So then I got to roll up my sleeves and tell her, well, when I was born, in my family, my dad was hitting bottom with alcoholism, and I was a really cranky baby, maybe because my dad was about to die of alcoholism, but nevertheless, it wasn't a harmonious entry, right, into the world. And then my dad got sober, which is a wonderful miracle of recovery, and I'm so grateful for it. And then they had a baby, my sister, the miracle baby, the sobriety baby. She came out blonde, she came out with straight teeth, she's never been overweight a day in her life. I think she's never had a pimple. Maybe I'm overdoing it, but that's, if anybody here has a golden sister, you know what I'm talking about. I've met a lot of women on this book tour, and a lot of them have this. And again, so I'm telling Meredith all about this. Oh, my sister, Virginia, blah, blah, blah. She said, me too. And my sister's name is Jenny, as in Virginia. And it was like, oh my God. So Meredith and I are both middle sisters, and our golden sisters are the babies. And that felt like, I don't know how it sounds to hear that, but for me, someone who is kind of resistant about this, the synergy or the coincidence of that made me feel like, oh my God, something's gonna happen. We're going to be looking at something together, and not one step of it do I have to do alone. I didn't have to explain to her what it felt like to have a sister who was awesome. And what we sort of figured out there on the curb, if any of you guys know Chicago, this was a meeting outside of St. Josephat Church on Southport Avenue. And we would sit there on the curb, and we would talk about it, and I would think, I can't believe this. I can't believe that you have a Jenny too, or you have a Virginia. And we thought to ourselves, that we think that some of our feelings about girls, thus, and our female friendships, were problematic because we were always projecting that our friends were our golden sister. And she said that first, and she was also she was in school to become a therapist. So it's kind of getting free therapy from her, which was great. And I'm bringing very little to this table because I was a lawyer. But we were talking about our sisters and our friends, and we started thinking about how jealous we'd been of our friends all through, like, oh, I could tell you. And I had friends that I loved. I have a very good friend to this day, Stephanie Mayhall. And we became friends first day of freshman year in high school. And from the second I saw her, look at those teeth, look at that perfect skin. Her dad drove a Porsche. You guys, my dad drove a Chevy that was like sometimes didn't work, and her dad rolls up in a Porsche. And it was all the dazzling things that a teenager would think about for status syncing. That wouldn't send me to the same places it would today, but at 14, she had the best hair, she always had a boyfriend, she was a cheerleader. Like, the way that I talk about my friends, the great loves of my life, my friends, is exactly how I talk about my sister. And in that, I would erase myself. Well, what about my hair? Oh, it's nothing like Stephanie's or my sister's. And Meredith and I were together discovering, oh, this is part of the problem here. Like, we've hit on it. Like, when we were starting to date, ironically, Meredith also married a man with the same name as my husband's name, and we had some of the, like, we just were like soul sisters, and I wouldn't have seen it if it hadn't been for her. So we decided, okay, so we did this excavating, we were doing forensic work, we were hitting on our sister issues, we were crackling on that sidewalk. And in the meantime, we were also having our ongoing, in real life friendships that were already in process long before she approached me to work on friendships. And there was trouble brewing there for me. One of the examples I'll tell you about is a friend named Callie. Now, Callie I loved. I wasn't super jealous of Callie. Callie's role in my life was when I was younger, and I was dating, and I'd come home from a date that lasted 40 minutes and wasn't that good. I'd call her bawling, "He's not the one." And she would say, "You don't even know him. You don't even like him. Why do you want him to be the one?" Like, she was my big sister. She was my champion. She told me to get online. She would proofread all my profiles. And she was a very important figure in my life, like a big sister, and that was new for me. However, once I met my husband, there was sort of a new chief in town, and she didn't like that I wasn't quite so. It was a role reversal to not have me always crying and kind of pathetic, and I never had any plans. So if she ever called me and said, "Let's go to Target," I was always available. But now I had a boyfriend, and his mom was in town, and we were going to go to the Cubs game, and I'd sort of like set on my feet right, and our relationship kind of bobbled with that. And it was difficult, right? It was like a transition, and I'd always struggled in friendship transitions, and so had Callie. So I'd tell Meredith all about my sister and what happened in 6th grade, and then we would pivot to like what was happening in the here and now. And I'd always bring up Callie. I was like, she's mad at me, she's upset, she doesn't like it that I have a boyfriend. I mean, I understood. Callie loved me, and she wanted to be like number one on my speed dial. But now she was number 2. And she was struggling in all the ways I would, so I had a lot of empathy for that. And we were sort of limping along, and I'm like, I'm working on friendship. I can do anything in this friendship. And then something really challenging happened, which is I got pregnant very, very soon, which felt a little bit like the universe was like, we saw how many guys you had to date, we're just gonna give you a baby, which I was very happy to receive that gift. Meanwhile, Callie was having a really hard time. And for any of you who know, that can be a very heartbreaking, tender journey. And you're waiting, and you're having medical interventions, and every month there's a heartbreak. And here I roll up, and I'm like, well, hey, I'm pregnant. And I didn't have a ton of skills, as you can imagine, to manage this very sensitive situation. Because on the one hand, I didn't want to leave Callie out. I didn't want to not call her after the doctor's appointment and say, we have a heartbeat, it's 175 beats a minute, I'm so excited. I didn't want to leave her out, but I also didn't want to rub her face in it. So we found ourselves again in this uneven, uncomfortable friendship space. But I was like, I have to hold on. I'm doing all this work with Meredith. But Callie was in a dark place. And because I didn't have many skills, I felt responsible. I felt like I'm supposed to fix it. Not mine to fix. I should have known that. Probably on some level I did. But every time I talked to her and I'd hear the, I would feel like, oh no, how do I fix it? What can I do to make it better for you? I can't give her a baby. I can't not have my own happiness. So we got into a dark place again. And all the while, Meredith is saying to me, be kind, show up, and listen. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. Except I kind of couldn't. I still wanted to fix it. And Callie and I limped along, and we limped along, and I couldn't take it anymore. I hit a breaking point. And I could have, now, today, if I hit that point again, I would say, look, something has to change. We'd go to tea, we'd take a walk, and I would just say, I would just be very forthright. I didn't have that skill then, and so I'm sure Meredith would want me to tell you, she did not endorse that I ghosted Callie. Nobody would endorse that, right? That's not a nice thing to do at all. But I couldn't think of a nicer thing to do. I couldn't say, I can't do this anymore. So she called me, and I didn't call, well, she called me and yelled at me on my voicemail, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna call back, I'm gonna take some space. Then I took some more space, then I took some more space, and then it was like, I kind of have to admit, I'm ghosting this friend of mine. She'd been a bridesmaid in my wedding, but I wasn't ready to unghost. And I met with Meredith, and I was scared to look her in the eye and tell her that I think I'm moving backwards. You know, I didn't think she would approve, and she wouldn't, and she didn't. And she said, when you know how to do better, you will do better. And I thought, okay, well, how do we speed that up? She's like, I'm not sure that we can. And again, she said, me too, and told me about a friendship that she was struggling in, that she wanted to leave. So then I felt like, okay, it's not just me. There's something about the chemistry between me and Callie that's not working, right? With Callie, I was her golden sister. And I'd never been on the flip side of that before. I'd always been like, oh, I'm the brunette, unattractive sister to the golden girl. And now Callie felt that way about me, that I was somehow golden and she was left behind. And I didn't know how to deal with that any more than I knew how to deal with Stephanie Mayhall, who's gorgeous next to me, right? So you can hear there's still a lot of work to do. And Meredith just kept saying, keep doing the work, keep doing the work. And there was another friendship that I got into with a friend named Anna. Callie's now on the wayside, so I'm like, Anna's a new friend, comes into my life, and I'm like, here's a chance to like start at the bottom with all good habits, right? She came into my life after Meredith. She'd been in our larger group of friends. She's also from the recovery community, so we had a lot of shared people. I should have known that this was going to be difficult because I had that old twingy envy of her. Like her house was really cute, her kids were really, really smart, and we would put our kids together and I would feel like, oh, your kids can do more than my kids can do. Yeah, because her kids were 2 years older than mine. So of course, right? So I just didn't have very good thinking at this point. I was still doing the comparison game, but I also loved Anna. I loved her. We worked on a couple of projects together. We were going to write some children's books. And when I was with her, we would have lunch and we would write these children's books and we loved our characters. And I was like, this is fine. This is fine. And then when we walked away, when I would drive home, I would think, there's not a speck of dust on her dust boards. And her refrigerator is full of healthy foods and avocado. It just seemed like she was so much better than me. But at least I had the moments of when we were together, then we could, I could put that behind me. The envy would recede when we were together, which felt like progress. And I would tell Meredith, like, oh, I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous of Anna. She's perfect in every way. And Meredith would say to me, maybe you can't see clearly. You probably can't see clearly. And I knew that Meredith also loved Anna, and she would say to me, you don't know what you bring to a relationship. Can you just appreciate who she is to you? And I thought, that seems so reasonable. Why do I need you to tell me that? I don't know why. I just did. So you can hear I was sort of limping along. Callie's gone sort of in my rear view mirror. I've got Anna, which isn't perfect. And now I've got 2 little babies, and I've got a husband, and I'm working. And truly, and Meredith and I would joke that we were kind of doing a do-si-do, a couple steps ahead, a couple steps back. She struggled with setting boundaries in her friendship. So she would say yes to things, and then she wouldn't want to do them. Then she would go and do them and be resentful. So she had her own things she was working on. And I think we probably would have inched forward like this together. Probably we could have done that for a couple more years, or probably 5 years, 10 years, we could have kept going. But then Meredith got sick, and really sick, the kind of get your affairs in order kind of sick, where we no longer, the luxury of a really long runway was sort of taken away from us. And I didn't have the illusion that I was going to be able to fix myself by the time she said goodbye to the planet. I didn't have that. But I thought, I wanna really use this opportunity. And it was around that time, maybe a little bit before, that I realized in working on friendship with Meredith, I was having a really, really important friendship with Meredith. And that I hadn't sort of seen, we're working, we are co-sponsors to each other. No, we were friends. And it took a minute to see that, right? And because she was the kind of friend who, we didn't go out together, we didn't do outings with our husbands together. I never saw the inside of her house. I've written a whole book about her. I didn't go in her house. She came to my house for a baby shower once. But it's a totally different category of friendship that happens a lot in recovery rooms, where you're there's a soul sister there. And no one, I have 3 pictures of Meredith in my whole, and she's an extremely important figure in my life, a friend. So she gets sick, and we have we're getting together, we're having coffee, and we're probably exchanging our homework, whatever we'd most recently written about. And all of a sudden, I was sitting across from her at a Panera, and I said, oh my God, there's gonna come a moment in your sickness and in our friendship where I'm gonna fail you. I just felt it so clearly, almost like I saw the ghost of future Christie doing something uncool to present day Meredith. And I said, oh my God, what am I gonna do? She said, okay, let's play it out. What do you think is gonna happen? And I said, well, I didn't really have a clear picture, but I thought, you're gonna be sick, and you're gonna be talking about what's gonna happen to your husband, or you're gonna be battling with real, true life and death issues, and I'm gonna be should I get bangs? What about me? I could see myself I was so worried about my selfishness or my immaturity ruining this friendship, and the stakes felt really high. And I said, I'm gonna fail you, I know I'm gonna fail you, I'm gonna do something so stupid, and I don't do well in friendship transition, and you're about to go through a really big transition. And Meredith, to her great credit, never wanted anything sugar-coated. She didn't say, I'm gonna pass away. She didn't want us to pretend like it wasn't happening. We'd sit down and she'd say, here, I want you to have this jewelry. I'm giving my jewelry away. And I would be like, we're not there yet. It's not time to give away your jewelry. And she would say, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Please accept it. Please don't make this harder on me because you need it to be easier. So, okay. So I'm telling her, I'm positive I'm gonna fail you. She said, yeah, you probably are. You probably are. You're gonna do something really stupid. She's like, do it early and let's get it over with. And if you don't, because if you do it late and we don't have time to repair, I will haunt you for the rest of your life. And I believe her. So I said, okay. But I mean, you guys, I doubled down. I was like, I'm sending you and your husband some sushi. I'm gonna come see you in the hospital. I mean, this is not, you don't get gold stars for doing the basics of friendship. You don't. But I definitely was like, okay, I don't feel the need to run. I'm scared of what's coming for her and her body and how I'm gonna feel about it, but I never felt like running. So that felt like a huge victory, right? I'm attached enough to be uncomfortable. And that's where I'd always gotten stuck, right? So she's getting sicker, and it's very unpleasant. We've all had friends, I'm sure, who've gotten sick. And at one point, she tells me that there's a trial, some medical trial at the University of Chicago, And she's telling me all about it and the studies and the profiles, and I'm so pumped. I am so pumped. I'm out of the booth. I'm like, okay, we're gonna get a meal train, we're gonna get a carpool train, and we're gonna get you. She lived in Uptown, and then the treatment would have been in University of Chicago on the south side, like about 110 blocks. I am not daunted by this. We are going to cure. We're going to do this trial. And so she tells me all about it, and then she says, well, I'm not doing it. And I was like, what? What do you mean? I understood the obstacles to be logistical. I'll drive you. Never mind, I have 2 kids, a full-time job, and I'm writing a book. Where am I driving her? Whatever. I was going to drive her every day and figure it out. And she kept saying, no, I don't want to do that. That's not good for me. And I kept saying, I don't care if it's good for you. This might work, right? Like I'm steamrolling her because I thought that a good friend friends don't let friends die, right? So I pushed and pushed, and she said to me, no. And I said, please. And she said, no. So we had a little fight about it, and for like a week, she didn't return my phone calls, and I thought I was right. I thought, I am saving her life, and someday she'll thank me. And she'd sort of frozen me out for like 5 days. On the 6th day, I went running with a group of friends. One of them is a doctor, and she does some pediatric oncology. And I sidled up beside her, and I said, so I have a friend who's pretty sick, and she could do this trial, and she doesn't want to do it. And I really wanted this doctor to say, you're right, you're such a good friend. That is not what she said. What she said to me is, don't you want to be able to die however you want? And don't you want your friends to give you the dignity of the choices that you're making, especially when it's life and death? And I was like, yes, but, and she was like, also, thank God, she was the perfect person to ask. She said, you know, there are lots of studies that show that people have better outcomes if they are with the doctors that care about them and have been through them all the way through. And it sounds like that's what she wants. The trial is no guarantee. Those people are strangers to her, and she's been having great care where she is up in Evanston. Why don't you just support that? So then I was like, oh, I knew I wasn't mad that she was wrong. I was mad that I'd been wrong, that I was so sure my brand of bulldog friendship was somehow in its bellicosity was admirable and what I'd never been able to do before. But I went back to that advice that Meredith had given me when I was having trouble with Callie. And the advice was, listen, be kind, and be open, right? So I had written Meredith all these letters about, well, let's go to Mayo Clinic, or what about MD Anderson? And finally, after I talked to this doctor, I said, Meredith, I wrote her a note. I said, Meredith, I've got your back no matter what. And that was the act of friendship that I'd been missing. It was sitting right there the whole time, but I didn't know. And that's the feeling I like least in the world, the I don't know. I'd rather push through, right? So this is all going on. Sweet Meredith is doing what sweet Meredith does, which is winding up her affairs. She's going with Grace, and one night I got a phone call from someone, and I recognized the number. It was Anna's number, Anna, who I was really jealous of, because she was in, you know those, just one more thing about how awesome she is. She was like in everyone's wedding. You know, like that's kind of friends where you're like, I'm happy to be at this wedding, and then, oh, of course, Anna is another bridesmaid. Okay, so Anna calls me, and she calls to tell me that Meredith has died. And I knew it was time, and I knew that Anna had stayed in touch very closely with Meredith's husband. And when I saw Anna's number calling me on a Thursday night at 9 o'clock, there's only one reason she would have been calling me. So first I let it go to voicemail, because I was like, as long, you know, this the Schrodinger's cat, right? As long as I don't know, Meredith's still alive, right? And then I texted another friend. I was like, Anna just called me, and I know why she called me. And my friend Robert said, call her, get over yourself and call her back. I was like, okay. I call her back, and Anna says, you know, Meredith died today, and very peacefully, and we're going to talk about the memorial service, like when her husband is ready, right? And we sat on the phone and we cried together, and we talked about how much we loved Meredith. And I thought, oh, this is another gift of the friendship that I had built with Meredith, that I got to sit with Anna, who was like a frenemy, nemesis, beloved, like such a confusing relationship. And I knew having that conversation right after Meredith died, it wouldn't be confusing ever again. I just knew it would not. Meredith had somehow given me the gift of perspective. It's so hard to get. I don't know how you get perspective without something terrible happening, right? And right then and there, I decided every year on Meredith's birthday, I would call Anna, and we would have some space and time to talk about just loving memory. It would be a memorial in loving memory of Meredith. And a few months later, I worked on a memorial service with Anna and a couple of other of Meredith's friends. We put together a beautiful service, and I got to stand up on a stage like this and memorialize her. And Anna was there, and Callie was there, and a whole bunch of other women I'd been jealous of. And I just thought, I don't have to live like that anymore. Something's happened here. Something huge has happened here inside my heart that I don't feel like that anymore. I don't feel like I need to be so scared that the women next to me are going to best me in every way possible. So shortly after that, I sold the first book, and then in the back of my mind, I'd always thought, I'm going to write a book about the work that Meredith and I did, about friendship. And there's some things that I wish that Meredith could have seen happen. First of all, she would be absolutely gobsmacked that I wrote a book about her. Meredith is not her real name. I'm not sure she would like that name I chose, but it's pretty close to her real name. But so I think she would be gobsmacked. One time we got in a little tiff about she was getting a hat to wear after her treatments, and the one that she really wanted was expensive, too expensive, and she didn't want to buy it. And she got this cotton one instead of this leather hat, and I was in my bulldog mode, and I wanted her to have the leather hat. And she was like, I don't want that hat, I don't want that hat. And we were standing in Nordstrom Rack at the hat section having a fight where I'm trying to tell a woman who's sick what kind of hat to buy. And she said to me, she said, why can't you leave me alone and let me do what I want? And I said to her, if any of you know the musical Hamilton, I was like, you know what your problem is? You think you're a Peggy, but you're an Angelica. And she was like really mad before that. And she's like, what? And I know she loved Hamilton. I was like, you think about that. You're an Angelica and you don't know it. And you need to figure that out. And you need to wear a hat that Angelica would wear. And she did not get the leather hat. I lost that fight, but I felt like the pulling out the Hamilton illusion got me a couple points with her. But so she would be a person who thinks they're a Peggy doesn't think anyone's writing them a book about them. You know, Peggy didn't have a lot of solos in Hamilton, if you know the musical. So she would be amazed that I've written a book about her. There's other things that came to pass that I wish I could tell her. And one of them is that Callie and I reconnected. After I ghosted, 10 years went by. I was waiting to do better, and an opportunity arose, and Callie and I were both part of somebody else's going away party. And Callie approached me, and she was like, I'm really sad that we broke apart. I said, me too. I said, I have a huge part in that, obviously, right? And she said, I did too. It does feel like in some ways the magic of friendship is me too for me. I know me too has other connotations in the larger world, but for me, for a friend to say me too is, it lowers my guard. I can automatically lower my guard. And what Meredith would get such a kick out of, what Callie proposed for us to come back together and have a conversation and do some deep work, like what we were both carrying at the time and the 10 years that elapsed. She said, would you come with me to my therapist's office for a couples counseling session for me and you in front of my therapist? And if you know anything about me, you know I love therapy. And I said, I mean, this felt really scary because this is a woman, her therapist has probably heard 10 years of things, Christie Tate, and all that she did. And I just said, yes, Let's do it. Let's have support. We're going to have a hard conversation about who did what to whom and what still hurts. And why not have a loving guide with us, you know? So it was on Zoom because it was during the pandemic, and I logged on, and I got there before Callie to the session, and I'm like, her therapist was very nice to me, but I'm like, you must hate me, right? You must think I'm so mean. And she was very warm and smiling. And what Callie gave me in this suggestion that's totally unorthodox was an opportunity. Like, Callie has her beloved therapist with her. All my excuses for why I can't say the cold, hard truth of myself are gone. She's got her support. She lived 10 years without me. She doesn't need me. I can tell the truth. My fear was always, if I tell Callie the truth, she's going to die. She's going to crumple. She can't take it. And this is her asking me. And I got to say I was really overwhelmed. I felt responsible for your feelings, which isn't her fault. That's on me. But I felt like nothing I did made you happy. Why would you want to be friends with me? And she's like, what else? And I said, that's it. That's it. That's it. And she said, are you sure there's nothing else? And I'm like, I promise you, I am telling you everything. Like, there were like a couple other, I was like, well, I didn't love it when I told you I was going on antidepressants. You made a funny sound. And she was like, okay, what else? And I'm like, really, that's it. You know, we got to the end of the bucket, and she had, again, I said, you know, I got to say to her, I got to make amends. I got to say, next time I need to leave a relationship, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to say to the person, I'm leaving, and here's why. Or I don't think I can stay unless these things change. Or I would be honest way sooner. And she said to me, thank you for the amends. And also, she made amends to me. She made amends to me for making me the source of her happiness. For thinking that if I still had her at speed dial number 1 as a sad single girl who's having disastrous dating problems, that she would be okay. That was a lie she was living. We were both living in narratives that weren't incompatible. And we agreed in that session in front of her therapist that we would try to do it differently, both in our other relationships and with each other. And I didn't love it when her therapist sent me a bill. I'll say it right there. But it was the best money I ever spent. It was the best money I ever spent, because now in every relationship, including with my revived relationship with Callie, the minute I feel that resentment, that walking on eggshells, that if she finds out XYZ, I'm going to be in trouble. Those are like the buzzwords. I'm like, I better clean it up now, or in 10 or 15 years, I'm going to have to go to therapy with this friend to say what I can't say today. And could it be that hard? And I've done it. I've said to friends, you know, this isn't working for me, or this arrangement doesn't work. I could not do that before. That's why I was a ghost. That's why I ghosted. So those are 2 things. There's 2 other things that I wish Meredith had lived to see, but they are her legacy. They are her legacy. One of them is, starting at the end of the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, in 2020, May of 2020, friends of mine from high school texted me and they said, oh, we saw you had a book come out. That was my first book. Do you want to meet us for a Zoom? And I thought it was a one-time thing, and I'm like, I'm like a big-time author now. I'm not ashamed. I'll come to your Zoom. So I go to the Zoom, and this was Stephanie Mayhall, the beautiful, who is still beautiful, Stephanie Mayhall, and 2 other friends, and they'd been friends all along. They'd gone to visit each other at college, they were in each other's weddings, and I missed 30 years of it. And they invited me to this Zoom, and I got on there, and I saw their beautiful faces, and I thought, oh my God, it was so painful to know I'd missed so much. But also, the invitation meant I don't have to miss any more. I don't have to unless I want to. And we have been Zooming every Sunday since May 30th of 2020. And I missed yesterday because I was on a flight. And it's gotten a lot harder now that life is resumed, like we have got kids and we travel and we do things. But for the most part, every Sunday I get to see all of them on Zoom, and they're back in my life. And I never, ever forget that I missed 30 years because of my sister issues and my low self-esteem or shame or whatever. And every time I'm clicking and I'm waiting for the screen to populate and I could see their faces, every time I think of Meredith and how she paved the way, or taught me how to pave the way in my own heart for the friendships I always wanted. And last March, this group of 4 high school friends, we did the thing I'd always been so jealous of. We all went to a beach. We went to Amelia Island in Florida. The whole time I was pinching myself. I'm with these friends I met in 1991 in high school who were lost to me for 30 years, and I'm here. I'm in the suite with them. I'm on the sand. I'm on the bicycle. I couldn't believe it. I was so grateful. So that's a huge one. And the last one, and before I close for the Q&A, is every January, around January 1st, a group of us, this is a different, I really like groups. That's probably why I wrote a book called Group, but there's a group of us, there's 4 of us who get together. It's Callie, and it's Anna, and it's me, and it's another dear friend of ours, Krista. We all get together and we do like a vision for the year. And we talk about what we want to let go of, what we want to have come to pass, what we've learned. And we do it at Bittersweet, an open public place. We're all crying the whole time. And that's another place where I totally pinch myself, like that I can sit and hear the wonderful things that happened in Anna's life. And her daughter is graduating from honors from a very fancy college, and her other one is a lacrosse superstar. And I feel total joy and interest and curiosity, instead of, oh, my kid's definitely not getting into that school, and neither one of my kids can do anything with a lacrosse stick except hit the other one. So that I can have those moments, or that I can hear Callie talk about what's challenging in her life and not feel like I'm supposed to fix. That's ludicrous. I can't believe I used to live like that. I don't think like that anymore. I'm happy to connect. I celebrate with them. I brainstorm with them. I friend with them. And then we get in our cars and go home and stay in touch throughout the year. And I know I'll see them next January. And it's a complete and total enrichment to my life that's not possible had I not done this work. And this story was not one that I saw in Allure magazine or on an Instagram reel or in my doctor's office when I flipped through a magazine about friendship. I needed something deeper, something richer, and I needed like a little laboratory, a little non-professional laboratory. I needed a friend, and I needed to learn friendship in friendship. So thank you for listening. I think we're going to do Q&A now.
What you've talked about seems to be strictly about women. What's the dynamic with men?
That is such a great question. If there's ever a man in the audience, he usually asks that question. And you know who else asked that question? My male friends. But for me, what I know, I have never had a problem in my male friendships. I'm not jealous of men. Like, they've always been in charge. They've always had privilege, like whatever. Like, I haven't had all those hot landmines inside of me around men. And I love being friends with men. There's 2 men that I have coffee with who are friends of mine every Wednesday, and they had that same question. I think when I rolled the tape back, it has to do with my relationship with my sister, which was making it hard for me to get over and just be vulnerable with women, and that's something that I haven't had the same obstacles with men. But that's a great question.
My question is this. You seem to have done deep diving with men and then with women. In the women's side of the equation, what's the role of physicality?
Right. That is a great question, too. So I think maybe something that I found difficult in my relationships with women is that friendship for me had been so much more vulnerable because I didn't know, how do you end a friendship? Like, if you're dating someone, you break up with them, but like there's no script in friendship, right? And so about breaking up. And to get to your question about physicality, it's like that gets confusing with me in my relationships with men sometimes, right? I mean, not now that I'm married, but in the past, like, there's all that notion of like sexual tension or whatever. But like with women, because that was off the table, I didn't have anything to hide behind. It was like, this is my character, this is what I have to offer, and there was no hiding behind subterfuge or coyness or like promises of physicality. And so I think that's where I ran into some trouble, because there were less refuges in my relationships with women than there were with men. And that's where I kind of got tripped up. So I think it's a great question. And I do wish that I, as a person, one of my friend, a very good friend of mine, she's in the book too, her name's Ellery. She says I'm not very like physically affectionate, and this is my female friend. And I'm like, yes, I am. And I think she's right that I'm not. And I wish that I had less inhibition in all my relationships around being just physically demonstrative. To your point, like, I wish I had a better physical lexicon for, throwing my arms around someone. Like, even my daughter, who's 15, if she's upset about something, I'll feel that impulse, like, this is where you throw your arms around her, mom, like, or whatever. But I'm always like, what if someone doesn't want to? Like, what if somebody wants space? And I'm so scared of being rebuffed physically that I think I'm unnaturally not demonstrative, even though the impulses are in there. But I'm so worried about what other people want from me that I just stifle a lot of my natural impulses, even with my children, which is, I got to get over that.
Have you worked out your relationship with your golden sister?
Oh, God. Not as much as I want to. Like, we've had some stops and starts. I sent her a copy of this book, and I didn't hear from her. She's very, very private and very shy, and there's like a mountain of things between us at this point. So I feel like I chip away at it like every few years. And also, time is running out. Didn't Meredith teach me that, right? Like, anything could happen. I'm 51, she's 48. You don't get forever. We all know that. You don't get forever. And it weighs so heavy on my heart. And I'm totally dragging my feet. I'm always like, let me do a little more. Like, I'll have friendships. I still go to group therapy, and I'll say, oh, I'm gonna work out my sister issues with this group member. And it's like, I'm just, let's be clear, stalling. So there's more work to do.
You mentioned that you gave the book to your sister. What did you have to get permission of everyone you had in the book, and how did they all handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So with my first book, I was I went way overboard because I was writing about group therapy and the people in group therapy. And when you go to therapy, you don't think, oh, I hope one of my group mates writes a book about what we're doing here, right? And I didn't want to jeopardize those relationships. Those are very, very vital to my life. And I also don't want to hurt anyone. And I didn't know what the ethics were. So with my first book, I gave everybody drafts. I mean, they didn't read them, but I gave them to them. And I was like, here's what I'm writing about. And I had a very, very tight system of ethics. Like, I don't write about anybody else's issues except my own, and I talk about how they helped me. And then even if some people didn't want to read it, I would send it to their spouse, because their spouses might look out, whatever. So when it came to this book, I was like, I don't have to be so codependent about everything. I get to write what I want to write. And so I went way in the other direction. Like, for my family, I feel like I get to write about them. They're all adults, and I didn't write about their business. I wrote about my business and how I see them, which I'm sure may not work for them, but that's where I landed. But like for Anna is a writer, and I wrote a lot about Anna and how jealous I was of her and how I saw her, and I just kept not sending her the book. And I was like, I knew I couldn't make myself send it to her. I don't know why. Like, I knew she wouldn't have stood in my way. I gave it to Callie. I gave it to all, like, the high school friends. They all had it. And Anna was like the sticking point. And it was like Thanksgiving, and it was coming out in February, right? It's too late to do anything. The hardbacks are out. And I finally just called her, and I was like, I am making a day after day a mistake. I've written a book. You're in the book, and I haven't showed you, and I haven't told you, and I don't know what to do. And she said, I'm so scared. And I was like, you should be. You should be very scared. And she said, why don't you come over and bring the book? And before I came over, she was gonna have like 2 therapy sessions to discuss it with her people. And so I went over there and I was like, I wish I would have given this to you sooner. I don't know what, I just couldn't do it. And she was like, okay, no problem. So then she read it, and then she called me, and she was very loving. She was like, thank you so much. It's a beautiful book. I loved Meredith too. And she didn't feel like I needed it. She's very well disguised. No one has their name. They're very well disguised. They know who they are. She would know it was her, but no one in her world would know. Even in my world, they're like, who's Anna? And I'm like, duh. Have you ever been to a wedding and seen her at every single one? So I would say it's a hard thing. I don't know if anybody here writes, but if you write creative nonfiction or memoir, that's a really hard thing. And I've gotten it wrong. I have definitely gotten it wrong in how I've treated. There's a peripheral character in B.F.F. She was a good friend of Meredith's, and she's a quirky woman, and she has a very distinct way of dressing. And I disguised her in every way except I talked about this dressing thing that she has. And I got a letter from her. I didn't think she would, it's a different name, different profession, whatever. But 2 weeks before B.F.F. came out, I got a certified, a letter on like crisp letterhead from her. And she's in a professional position. I was like, uh-oh. And I opened it up and she's like, I've read B.F.F. And I thought, this is a cease and desist, and I'm in so much trouble. It was not a cease and desist, but what she said was, I read an early copy of your book, and I saw how you described me, and I know how you see me. I like the way I dress, and I'm sorry that you don't, which is a great thing to say. Like, who am I? Look at me, you know? Like, I'm not the arbiter. I'm not Anna Wintour, and she definitely called me out for being not kind. And then she went on to say for 2 paragraphs how much she loved Meredith and how much the book would help other people, which I thought was so generous. And I wrote her a letter and I said, I could have been so much kinder, and I hope that in the future, if I get the opportunity to write again and the privilege to write about you, that I will do so with much more care and much more kindness. And I'll let you read it in advance. And I talk to other memoirists, like, if you screw it up, all you can do is promise to do it better the next time. And I tell that story to sort of like tell on myself, like, it's hard, it's tricky. I didn't think she would, I don't know what I thought. I could have totally left. Who cares how she dresses? I didn't need to put it in there. And I wouldn't next time. So unfortunately, that's one I learned on the job. It's a little bit embarrassing. More for me than her.
I have a good friend who is an identical twin, and she was the less dominant of the twins. And this is going to be something that, and she has always been trying to catch up to the other twin. Well, recently, the dominant twin passed away. And so now my friend is trying to put all the pieces together. And I think that your book will be a perfect thing to help her through where she is in her life. And yet, you know, her twin, I used to look at her sister and think, oh my God, she's a $3 bill. She was wearing Hershey earrings in 1962, getting off an airplane and just shocking the daylights out of her mother. And this other person would never have thought there any way in the world would she ever consider wearing something as crazy as what her sister was. And so I'm very eager to read your books, and I will share them with her, because I think my friend will have a chance to come down and realize, yes, this is where we are, and this is what's happened, and feel free to go through and live the rest of her days.
Yeah. I do think there's something so pernicious, or persistent, maybe pernicious too, about the notion if there's more than one sister, like the comparisons, like, even my dad's 81 years old, and I ran into someone this weekend. I was in Houston. I ran into someone who knew his great-grandfather in Forreston, Texas. And he was like, oh, yes, they had one daughter who was the really attractive one. And I was like, well, what about the other one? Like, that's how we used to talk about women. I mean, maybe we still do. Like, I only have a daughter and a son, so I don't have to contend with that. But I think there's just historically been a real tendency to really, this was the smart one, this was the handy one, this one had a pretty face, this one had a good personality. So I think that we carry that in our bodies as women who have been sisters.
I wonder if your younger sister looks at you as the golden one.
People have suggested that that's possible, and I do, back to the earlier question, I have the dream of sometime, like, this is what I picture. My sister lives in Dallas. Like, we book a weekend at, like, a dude ranch. I don't know why I'm setting this up this way, but, like, where there's no Wi-Fi and there's no kids, and it's some scrub brush, whatever, some tumbleweed, and we just, like, lay it all out on the table. I bet she would be shocked. I mean, I wrote a lot about it in B.F.F. I don't know if she's read it, but, like, there's other stuff in there that's, like, we would hold up to the light the stories or the ideas that we have about who we are in the world or in our family, or what mom thought about us, what dad thought about us. And I think it would be shocking and so healing for both of us to have that sort of be right-sized, about the gifts we both brought to the table that were different, and some were the same and some were overlapping, and how we could make peace with that.
I'll take it in a different direction. Well, my father was career Army, so I grew up all over. We were never in one place. I tended to be a loner. I walked around a lot. I liked the other people, but I never really connected, and it's kind of the same now. That's why I like the 19th century and where I am now, because it's a community that they're all good people, and they've created a safe place for me to wander around. Which is why I like good government too, and I have to worry about that now. So I never, even my family, I loved them and they took care of me, but I never, and I think that's, true of some people, they just don't connect hard. You have to work really hard for me not to like you. And very few people have, achieved that. So I like most people. I appreciate what they do, and wherever I am, and I like our social structures, because that allows a variety of people, and there are a variety of people. But you said a lot of things I could see, and that also have some commonality, with treating other people. So it was very interesting. I probably won't buy your book, but if because I'm into science fiction and steampunk. And the Jane Austen Society, so I could wander around in costumes.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for staying.
And those are also good people.
Thank you.
That have created a wonderful society for me.
Duana, I have such a different picture of you now. Thank you for sharing. Thank you very much, Christie, for sharing with us today.
Thank you.